Hello and welcome. Something found you, not the other way around. Somewhere between the life you've built with reason and language and careful thought. Something older than all of those things has always been watching from the inside out. It breathes in the dark behind your eyes. It knows every locked door in your mind, and it is endlessly patient. It does not knock. Tonight, we are going to look it in the face. Tonight, we descend into a place with no ceiling, no horizon, and no exit. We walk into the endless maze, and we meet the thing that built it. We meet Baphomet, the demon prince of beasts, the horned king, the lord of minotaurs. And we stay long enough to understand what he actually is. You have probably heard his name before. Even if you have never played a session of Dungeons and Dragons in your life, the name Baphomet carries a weight that reaches back through centuries. It moves through mythology, through folklore, through the long history of symbols that humans invented to give faces to things they were afraid of inside themselves. The Knights Templar were accused of worshipping a figure by this name. Occultist Eliphas Levi drew the iconic horned, winged figure that most people picture when the name surfaces in a conversation. But the Baphomet of Dungeons and Dragons lore is something specific and deeply developed. Something with a history, a domain, a philosophy, and a tragedy buried so deep inside it that most people who encounter him never even think to look for it. That is what we are here for tonight. Not just the demon lord, the whole shape of him. Before we start our journey, please consider subscribing to the channel. It is the surest way to find your path back to our library of lore when you wake. Section 1, The Horn That Calls. Let's begin where all things in this part of the multiverse begin. With the abyss. The abyss is not one place. It never has been, not in any cosmological text, not in any of the great planar surveys conducted by scholars brave or foolish enough to study it from a respectful distance. The abyss is an infinite cascade of layers, each one its own self-contained world of suffering and strangeness, each one ruled by a different will, or shaped by a different flavor of primordial evil. Some of these layers are volcanic and screaming, rivers of fire cutting through black glass plains under a sky the color of a bruise. Some are frozen in a cold, so deep it stops thought before it stops blood. Some are forests made entirely of rot, where even the light that somehow falls through the canopy smells like old death. And then there is the 600th layer, the one that does not simply burn or freeze or rot, the one that waits. The 600th layer of the abyss is a maze. But to call it a maze the way you would call a hedge garden a maze, or a puzzle book a maze, is to miss everything that matters about it. The endless maze is a place that fights the concept of being known. Its walls are, in the outer regions, worked stone of a rougher make, 10 feet across in most corridors, ceilings rising 10 to 20 feet above a level floor worn smooth by the passage of centuries of feet and hooves and claws. But the sameness of those dimensions is deceptive, because the corridors do not stay where you left them. A passage you walked down an hour ago will simply not be there anymore, replaced by a junction you have never seen, leading in 4 directions, none of which existed before. The endless maze does not want to be mapped. It is, in this sense, Baphomet's most complete argument, not spoken in words, spoken in stone and disorientation, and the sound of something very large moving in a corridor 2 turnings away. To enter the endless maze without Baphomet's blessing is not a death sentence, exactly. It is something slower than death. It is a sentence of wandering, of losing the thread, of gradually forgetting what your name was, what world you came from, what it felt like to be a person who knew where they were going. Creatures have been found in the outer corridors of the endless maze, ones that walked in as fully capable and intelligent beings, and were found years later walking in tight circles, unable to form sentences, their eyes full of something that looked like the maze itself. They did not die in there. They just became something else. And somewhere at the center of all of it, in a place the maze itself seems to fold toward, there is a fortress. It is called the Liction. And in the Liction, somewhere within its cold iron rooms, sits Baphomet. Now let's talk about who he is before we talk more about where he lives. Because the place only makes sense when you understand the creature that shaped it. Baphomet is a demon lord, which means he occupies a rank in the hierarchy of the abyss that most other creatures, most mortals, and even most other fiends can barely comprehend. He is classified among what planar scholars call the Tanari, those demons born of pure chaos and evil who have accumulated enough power across endless ages to rule their own layer of the abyss, to become something like a god to the things that serve them, and to make their influence felt across the planes, whether or not anyone invites it. Among demon lords, Baphomet is counted among the most ancient and the most powerful. He is not the most social of them. He does not spend his existence in elaborate political maneuvering the way that some of his peers do. What he is, and what he has always been, is something more direct. Every account of his appearance, from the oldest planar texts to the most recent observations by those bold enough to record them, agrees on the essential shape of him. He stands approximately 20 feet tall, an immensity that fills space in a way that makes you aware of the space in a new way. The way a very large animal does when it enters a small room, and the air pressure seems to change. His body is that of a massive minotaur, covered in black fur. His hands are enormous, each finger ending in thick curved nails. And and rising from his head are 6 iron horns. Not 2, 6. They sweep outward and curve in ways that seem almost deliberate, almost architectural, as though his own skull is a preview of the maze he rules, a rough draft in bone and iron. His eyes are what people mention last, and they are the part that stays. Those eyes burn with a fiendish red light that cuts through the dark of the endless maze without warming it. When you look into them long enough, there is something behind that light that thinks, something that watches, something that has been looking at the multiverse for so long that it has stopped being surprised by anything in it and has moved on to forming quiet, final opinions. He carries a weapon called Heartcleaver. In the 5th edition of the game, it is described as a great glaive, a long-bladed weapon suited to the enormous reach of a 20-foot creature. In older editions of the game, it was described as a bardage, which is a type of curved polearm blade, and the physical image across both descriptions is not so different in feel. What matters about Heartcleaver is not just the weapon itself, but the creature wielding it. What Baphomet brings to a fight is not only the instrument, it is the absolute, consuming certainty of a predator who has never, in its entire existence, experienced doubt about what it is. That certainty has its own effect on those who face him. His stat block in 5th edition includes a frightful presence, a specific, radiating aura of terror that does not require the weapon to activate. It is simply what he is, made external. His symbol, carried by his cults across every plane that acknowledges him, is a twisted circular maze awash in blood. Compact and unmistakable, it says everything about him in a single image. The maze that eats, the path that closes behind you. His titles tell you quite a bit. The demon Prince of Beasts is the one you encounter most often in the planar texts, and it names his dominion clearly. He rules over the savage, over the creatures that live in the space between pure animal instinct and something more complex. The Horned King carries older resonance, something that feels pre-cosmological, echoing of wild spirits and forces that may have existed before the current arrangement of the planes. The Lord of Minotaurs is the most specific, and it points toward one of the most important threads in his entire story. Because Minotaurs in Dungeons and Dragons lore are not simply a species of large horned humanoids. They are, in many fundamental ways, a people defined by their relationship with Baphomet, born under his shadow, shaped by his presence. We will return to that in full. But for now, understanding Baphomet means sitting with what he represents at the level of concept and deep cosmological purpose. The Forgotten Realms Wiki offers one of the clearest single-sentence distillations of him that exists anywhere in the source material. Civilization is weakness, and savagery is strength. That is his credo. Not the credo of a creature too simple to understand what civilization offers. Based on everything we know about him, this reads as a deliberate rejection rather than ignorance. What Baphomet embodies is not the mindless beast. What he embodies is the beast that knows what it is. The predator who is aware of its own nature. The intelligence that understands civilization completely and has made a choice. A deliberate, fully informed, philosophically committed choice. And the choice is no. His origin is one of the more intriguing pieces of confirmed canon surrounding him. And it is brief enough that it opens more questions than it closes. The source material states that Baphomet began his existence as a mortal creature, though it is unknown, even by Baphomet himself, whether he was a beast that lived as a man or a man who lived as a beast. Some sources suggest he was cursed by the gods for daring to treat them like cattle and was banished to the abyss. What is noted is that Baphomet, whatever happened, came to see the curse as a blessing. He reveled in what the abyss made him. This could suggest that the journey from mortal to demon lord was not something that broke him, but something that completed him, at least in his own understanding of himself. Whatever he was before the abyss gave him the endless maze, and the endless maze became his answer to every question worth asking. That philosophy has moved through the multiverse like something slow and cold and unstoppable, and the things it touches tend to change. There are cults on every inhabited plane that whisper his name. There are rituals conducted in forest clearings and underground chambers, and the back rooms of cities that were supposed to be civilized. Rituals designed to welcome his attention, to begin the process of tearing down the distinction between the thinking person and the beast the thinking person used to be. His influence bleeds outward from the endless maze in waves that are quiet and constant. And the things those waves reach often stop being what they were. The entrance to the endless maze does not announce itself. It does not offer warnings or dramatic architecture. You simply find yourself in a corridor. Stone on both sides, cold air moving from somewhere you cannot identify, and the slow understanding settling into your chest that you have been walking for longer than you thought. And the corridor behind you looks different than it did before. We're already inside. Section 2. The architecture of the endless maze. The walls here are not decorated. That is the first thing you notice when your eyes adjust and you actually look at them. In the great and terrible domains of other demon lords, the architecture tends to announce itself. Orcus builds his towers with bones and obvious intention. Grozit's layers drip with mirrors and surfaces designed to show you versions of yourself you would rather not meet. Even the most brutish of the Tanari princes tend to mark their territory in ways that communicate something about them. But in the outer corridors of the endless maze, the walls simply are. Worked stone, dense and cold, corridors typically around 10 feet across, ceilings rising 10 to 20 feet above a floor worn smooth by the passage of centuries of feet and hooves and claws. No carvings, no paintings, no murals of conquest or devotion. The maze does not tell you about itself. It simply contains you. The lighting in those outer corridors comes from ever-burning torches, fixed at intervals along the walls, their flames cold and steady, and producing just enough illumination to see the passage ahead of you without producing enough warmth to make the place feel anything other than what it is. The light does not flicker. It does not respond to the air moving through the corridors the way a real fire responds. It simply burns, constant and indifferent, and it lights the next turn, and the one after that, just enough to keep you moving. Whether that consistency is a mercy or part of the trap is something you begin to wonder around the 4th or 5th hour, when the torches all look identical, and you can no longer remember if you have seen this particular junction before. And that, once you understand what Baphomet believes, makes perfect sense. A maze that explained itself would be a maze that could be learned. A maze that stayed fixed in place would be a maze that could be memorized and solved. The endless maze does not want to be solved. It does not want to be anything other than what it is, the purest possible expression of its master's philosophy. Every thinking creature that enters wants to find the pattern. Every mind begins immediately trying to map it, to record corners and junctions, to find the repeating logic behind the construction. The endless maze refuses to cooperate with that impulse. It is Baphomet's most complete argument, not spoken in words, spoken in stone and disorientation, and the sound of something very large moving in a corridor 2 turnings away. The 600th layer of the abyss, the layer that contains the endless maze, extends without any charted boundary. Expeditions that attempted to survey its outer limits either never returned or returned with records that described corridors and junctions, extending in every direction, far beyond any conceivable finite domain. The layer is not simply the maze, as visitors experience it, though. The endless maze is also connected through passages and dimensional seams to other labyrinthine places elsewhere in the multiverse. The puzzling hedge of Shendelavri, the domain of the demon Lord Malkanthet, connects to the endless maze through passages that most inhabitants of both places would prefer not to use. The Valley of the Crypt Things in Thanatos, Orcus's own lair, has similar connections. What this could imply is that the maze's geometry is not contained to a single layer, but extends its logic outward threading connections through the plains, the way a root system threads through soil. The maze touches more of the multiverse than its walls suggest. Within the 600th layer, Baphomet does not rule alone, which is a detail that tends to surprise people encountering the full scope of his domain for the first time. A demon lord named Pale Night, sometimes called the Mother of Abirith, holds a region of the layer as her own territory. Her domain within the 600th layer is anchored by a structure called the Bone Castle, a place whose description in the planar texts is brief and unpleasant, and which Pale Night does not invite visitors to examine closely. The relationship between Pale Night and Baphomet is not one of alliance or active hostility in any documented sense. It is more of a coexistence. Two very old and very powerful presences occupying the same vast space, each largely indifferent to the other unless circumstances force otherwise. What it suggests about the 600th layer is that even Baphomet, for all his dominance, inhabits a layer large enough to contain something he does not fully control. The maze is his, but the maze is also very, very large. The outer regions of the endless maze, the areas closest to whatever passes for an entrance, are relatively stable. The walls still shift, corridors still rearrange themselves on a timescale that frustrates mapping. But a careful and experienced explorer can sometimes find junctions that reappear with some consistency, passages that seem to exist with more reliability than others. These outer regions are populated by a range of creatures, some of which have been there for generations, born into the maze and knowing no other world. Minotaurs are the most common. We will spend a great deal of time with minotaurs tonight, but for now understand that their presence in the outer maze is not incidental. Many of them are there because Baphomet placed them there, and they serve as both guardians and, from his perspective, as a kind of proof of concept. The Minotaur who was born in the maze and has never known anything else, who moves through its corridors with total confidence, who does not struggle against the disorientation, because it has never had orientation to begin with. That creature is, from Baphomet's perspective, something like a completed argument. Beyond the Minotaurs, the outer and middle regions of the maze contain populations of demons that Baphomet has cultivated across centuries. Goristros, which are enormous demonic minotaur-like creatures standing over 20 feet tall themselves, roam the wider corridors as his shock troops and enforcers. They are not identical to minotaurs in any meaningful way, but they occupy a similar symbolic space in his domain. Alongside the Goristros, the maze houses Bulizaus, lean and savage demonic creatures that serve in combat roles throughout the layer, fast and aggressive in ways that complement the heavier Goristros. And there are Gowers, creatures that occupy the Minotaur-adjacent space in demonic form, appearing throughout the maze in numbers that make them something close to background fauna. These populations are not accidental. Baphomet breeds them deliberately, and that deliberate breeding connects directly to one of the most significant locations in the entire layer. Moving deeper into the maze, something changes in the architecture. The corridors widen. The stone becomes cleaner and more precisely cut. The rough, serviceable construction of the outer passages gives way to something more deliberate and more impressive. Near the Liction and the other major structures of Baphomet's domain, the maze's architecture becomes intricate and well-maintained. The walls here are ivory, white marble, granite, and porphyry, fitted with a precision that speaks of real craft and real intention behind the building. The ceilings rise higher. The floor shows those deep, worn grooves made by enormous hooves, recent and deep. And you understand that these corridors exist on the scale of their maker. This inner region shifts more aggressively than the outer rings. Passages here are almost never in the same configuration twice. The maze in this region feels less like a building and more like something alive, moving in response to something you cannot see. And at the center, the place the maze seems to curl toward, stands the Liction. The Liction is Baphomet's palace, and the word palace does not carry the associations here that it carries elsewhere. It is not luxurious. It is not beautiful in any conventional sense. It is a vast fortress of black iron and dark stone, its towers rising to heights difficult to estimate given the way the inner maze handles vertical space. Its gatehouse large enough to admit Baphomet himself at full height without requiring him to lower his 6 iron horns. The outer walls are smooth and purposeful. The gates are enormous, their surfaces etched with markings that appear nowhere else in the maze, markings that plainer scholars have described as possibly linguistic and possibly architectural and possibly neither. Inside the Liction, the atmosphere does not soften. There are no decorations that serve comfort. What there is order. A severe, functional order that might surprise you given that the being who built it has committed himself entirely to the rejection of civilization's pretenses. But this is not a contradiction when you understand his position correctly. Baphomet does not reject organization. He rejects the lie that organization is the natural state of things. His fortress is organized the way a predator's body is organized, efficiently, purposefully, with no wasted space and no softness anywhere. The throne room sits at the highest accessible point of the central keep, and it is immense. The throne itself is iron, built for someone who takes up a great deal of physical space. He holds court here after a fashion. His most powerful minotaur champions stand in rows along the walls. Creatures that serve as his intelligence network make their reports. And occasionally, rarely but memorably, a delegation from some other power in the multiverse requests an audience, and Baphomet grants it, because despite everything, he is a being who understands the value of information and the occasional utility of at least the motions of diplomacy. He simply approaches it the way he approaches everything, without pretending to be something he is not. There is a second major structure in the inner region of the endless maze, one that does not get mentioned as often as the Liction, but which is arguably more significant in terms of what it tells you about what Baphomet actually does with his time. It is called the Tower of Science. The name carries a cold and deliberate irony, because what happens in the Tower of Science is not science in any sense that a mortal scholar would recognize as belonging under that word. Baphomet uses the Tower of Science to create, to breed and shape and engineer living things, to take existing creatures and change them into something new, or to construct entirely new forms of demonic life. The Goristros and the Bulizaus and the Gowers that populate the corridors of the endless maze are among his results. Creatures shaped in the Tower of Science across centuries of patient work. More recently, the planar texts describe the creation of creatures called feral Ankashars, which represent even more specific refinements of his breeding programs. Baphomet's interest in animals, in the nature and form and capability of beasts, is not passive or merely philosophical. He studies them the way a master craftsman studies the properties of materials, with the intention of working with those properties, of building things that express what he has learned. The Tower of Science is where that learning becomes physical. The Liction is also known for what it holds below the surface as much as what it holds above it. Baphomet keeps prisoners in the dungeons beneath the fortress. Not prisoners in the typical sense, not captives held for ransom or information. He keeps what the texts call the lost, mortals and other creatures who were brought to the endless maze and have survived long enough to have their identity largely consumed by the experience. These are beings that arrived with names and purposes and have gradually become something more like the maze itself, functional but fundamentally altered. At intervals, Baphomet releases the lost into the maze and hunts them, not casually, deliberately, with full attention. The hunt of the lost is, based on what we can infer from the source material, the closest thing Baphomet has to a private ritual, a practice conducted for its own sake, rather than for any military or political purpose. The purest expression of what he believes in, the predator and the prey, and nothing else between them. There is a garden in the Liction as well, an open courtyard where Baphomet keeps live animal specimens collected from across the plains. This is confirmed in the planar texts. and it surprises almost everyone who encounters the reference for the first time. Not a garden of flowers or growing things, not in any comfortable sense. He keeps beasts there, creatures of various kinds gathered from the material plane, from the beastlands, from deeper regions of the abyss, from wherever his cultists and summoners can reach. He observes them. He is genuinely interested in how they move and eat, and navigate their enclosure and interact with each other. In those moments, you can see what he actually loves in the world. Not pain specifically, not destruction specifically. The honest creature, the thing that does not pretend. The endless maze does not let you go. That is the last thing to understand about the physical place before we move to the people it made and unmade. Once the endless maze has you, the experience of it does not simply end if you manage to find an exit, or if someone pulls you out by magical means. The geometry stays with you. The habit of watching walls for movement, the reflex of listening for hoofbeats in corridors that are empty, the faint but persistent sensation that the room you are currently in was a different shape a moment ago. People who have been inside the maze and returned describe these residual effects for the rest of their lives, which are often shorter than they would otherwise have been. The maze leaves a mark, and the mark is, in essence, a small piece of Baphomet's philosophy installed at the base of the mind. A quiet, constant voice that says, beneath all the names and maps and carefully built structures you live inside, the walls move, and the beast is still here. Section 3. The Cult of the Horned King. Nobody chooses Baphomet the way you choose a deity who offers comfort or community, or the promise of something better waiting on the other side of a faithful life. The gods and powers that attract followers with warmth, with light, with the suggestion that devotion will be rewarded with peace. Those powers move through the world in a particular way. They build temples with open doors. They train priests who smile. They make the joining easy because the appeal is broad, and the cost, at least at the surface level, appears manageable. Baphomet does not do any of that. His cults do not recruit with warmth. They do not promise peace, and the cost is not hidden at all. It is stated plainly from the very beginning, and the people who hear it and still say yes are the specific people he wants. To understand how someone ends up in a Baphomet cult, you have to understand a particular kind of frustration. Not the common frustrations of poverty or injustice or loneliness, though those can open the door. The specific frustration that leads someone toward the Horned King tends to be deeper and more personal than circumstance. It is the frustration of a person who feels deeply and persistently that the world they were born into is built from rules that were made by people less capable than they are, enforced by systems that reward compliance over excellence, structured to keep the most genuinely powerful and capable creatures in boxes designed for the average. There is a particular kind of person who arrives at Baphomet, and they tend to be intelligent, tend to have real ability of one kind or another, and tend to have a profound and personal experience of feeling caged. Not literally, usually. Caged by expectation, by propriety, by the invisible walls of social organization that tell you what you are allowed to be and how fast you are allowed to move and what tools you are allowed to use. Baphomet's philosophy finds these people before the cult does. A book that asks the wrong questions. A mentor who says things that feel like they should not be said out loud. A moment in a wilderness, alone, watching something hunt and feeling something stir that was not supposed to be there. The philosophy arrives as a kind of recognition, as the sensation of hearing something you always knew but had never heard anyone say. That the beast is real. That the beast is not the worst part of you. That the civilized shell you have been building and maintaining your entire life is not the truth about what you are. It is a performance, and you are very, very tired of performing. After the philosophy comes the structure. Baphomet's cults vary in their specific organization, depending on where they form and what traditions they grow out of. But certain features appear consistently across all documented iterations. The cults are hierarchical, but not in the way a religious organization tends to be hierarchical. Rank in a Baphomet cult is not granted by seniority, or by theological study, or by the approval of a superior. It is earned by demonstrated dominance, by the ability to impose your will on the others around you, by the capacity to be, within the group, the predator rather than the prey. Every gathering of Baphomet's cultists is, at some level, a testing of that hierarchy, an ongoing live assessment of who is strongest, who is sharpest, who most completely embodies the principle they have all gathered around. Leadership changes constantly in these cults, not through election or succession, through challenge. A leader who cannot defend their position from a strong challenge is not a leader anymore, and the transition tends not to be gentle. This creates cult communities that are intensely vital in some ways and savagely unstable in others. They do not accumulate the comfortable rot of long-entrenched hierarchies, because no one stays at the top long enough for that kind of decay to set in. But they also cannot sustain very long-term projects, because the person who started the project is usually gone before it finishes. They are good at raids, good at short, violent, decisive actions. The patient, decades-long cultivation of institutional power that some other cults manage is generally beyond them. And Baphomet, one could infer, does not consider this a failing. What they do manage and manage with a consistency that is genuinely impressive is ritual. Baphomet's cults are among the most ritual observant in the abyssal pantheon. The most common practice is the hunt, conducted on a regular cycle whose timing varies by cult. An actual hunt, not metaphorical. Cult members go out into whatever wilderness surrounds them and hunt something, not always for food, or not only for food, for the practice of the act, for the deliberate return to the state of predator, the conscious and ritual removal of the civilized self for the duration. The agreement made, whether spoken aloud or simply felt, that for this span of time, you will be the thing inside you and nothing else. Hunters returning from these rituals describe the experience with a consistency that is worth noting. Clarity, simplicity, relief from the constant noise of thinking about what things mean and what is expected and what comes next. For the duration of the hunt, there is only the hunt. And Baphomet's philosophy holds that this is not an escape from reality. This is reality. The rest is noise, deeper within the cult tradition, reserved for those who have proven themselves through the lower levels of membership. There are initiation rites connected directly to the concept of the maze. The specific form these rites take is not preserved in any single canonical text with step-by-step detail, but based on what we know about how Baphomet's philosophy translates into practice, the pattern can be reasonably inferred. The maze is not only a place, it is a principle. And principles, in any genuine religious tradition, find their way into the bodies of believers through physical practice. The experience of disorientation, of exhausted navigation, of the moment when thinking stops being useful and something else takes over. That experience is the sacrament. Whether it happens in the endless maze itself, or in a constructed reflection of it built for initiatory purposes. What matters is the moment when the initiate stops trying to solve the environment with their mind and starts moving through it with something that predates thought. That moment, whatever the specific ritual container around it, is where the cult understands transformation to occur. It is where the beast, in Baphomet's own philosophical framework, surfaces. Not every initiate survives such rites. The cults are candid about this, more candid than you might expect. Those who do not make it through are understood within the tradition, not as victims of misfortune, but as beings in whom the beast was not strong enough to surface when the mind finally gave out. This is callous in a way that is entirely consistent with everything else about how Baphomet approaches the question of worth. There is no room in his philosophy for the idea that every life has equal value regardless of capability. That idea belongs to the civilized cage. In the maze, worth is demonstrated or it is not. The minotaurs, though, are where the story of Baphomet's cults becomes something with real depth and genuine tragedy. Because the Minotaurs are not cultists in the way mortal humanoids are cultists. They did not choose Baphomet the way a frustrated young spellcaster chose him. The Minotaurs are his, in the most complete and complicated sense of that word. Across most Dungeons and Dragons settings and source materials, Minotaurs are explicitly connected to Baphomet as their patron, and in many accounts their creator, though the specific mechanics of that creation are presented carefully. The Forgotten Realms texts describe Baphomet as the Lord of Minotaurs and their patron deity. And Minotaur culture in most settings carries the unmistakable shape of his influence at its very foundation. One of the most prominent theories within the lore, and it is presented as a theory rather than confirmed fact even in the source material itself, holds that the first Minotaurs were not born, but made. That they were humanoid creatures, taken by Baphomet or transformed through prolonged contact with his power, who emerged changed in body and in nature, carrying something of the beast he represents grafted permanently onto minds that were already formed. This theory circulates widely among planar scholars, and what makes it compelling is how well it accounts for the specific quality of what Minotaurs are. Not simply large, horned humanoids, but people with a rage in them that sits just below everything else. A heat that rises without predictable warning, that transforms in moments of high stress or combat into something that feels less like anger and more like weather, like a storm moving through them rather than something they feel. Whether that rage is a gift or a curse depends entirely on who you ask, and the Minotaurs themselves do not agree. That disagreement is one of the most interesting things about them, because Minotaur cultures across the settings that include them handle the heritage differently. Some Minotaur communities in Faerun embrace it fully. They build cultures that honor the hunt and the charge and the maze as sacred things, that understand Baphomet as the one who gave them their truest form, and that organize their communities around exactly the principles his philosophy describes. These are the Minotaur clans most commonly found within the Endless Maze, those that serve as its guardians and its living architecture, proud in a way that is entirely genuine and entirely consistent with their tradition. But there are other Minotaurs who experience the heritage as a condition rather than a calling, who have built communities that try to cultivate the mind, that practice specific disciplines of patience and deliberate reflection, that treat the rage not as a sacred truth, but as a feature of their nature to be understood and navigated. These Minotaurs are not self-hating. They do not disown what they are, but they have made a different choice about what it means to be what they are. And that choice puts them in a specific and quiet tension with their own deepest nature every single day. The question of whether a minotaur can truly choose something other than what Baphomet built them for, if he built them at all, is one the minotaurs themselves argue with the kind of passion that only comes from a question that is not academic. It is the most personal question they have, and the answer, whatever it turns out to be for any individual minotaur, is being worked out in real time, in real lives, in every community of minotaurs that ever decided to make something other than a weapon of itself. Baphomet, for his part, does not appear troubled by minotaurs who try to choose differently. The source material does not describe any active persecution of minotaurs who reject his influence. What it suggests, in the texture of how he is written and how his philosophy is framed, is that he simply watches. He has been watching longer than any individual minotaur has been alive, and he believes, with the calm certainty of a being that has observed patterns repeat across timescales. No mortal creature can hold in mind all at once that the architecture he may have placed in them at the beginning has not gone anywhere. The beast does not disappear because you have decided not to acknowledge it. It waits. It has always been better at waiting than the mind that sits above it. And in that patience, that absolute, untroubled willingness to simply let time do the work, you can hear something of the maze itself. The maze does not chase you. It does not need to. It is everywhere you are going. Section 4, the soft beast within. There is a version of Baphomet that almost no one talks about. Not because the information is hidden exactly, or because the plainer scholars who study demon lords have collectively agreed to leave it out. More because it requires sitting with a kind of discomfort that most people who encounter him prefer to avoid. It is easier to keep him at the level of monster. It is easier to file him as ancient evil, pure and absolute. A being that has always been exactly what it currently is, and will always be exactly that. Easier and incomplete, because buried in the oldest accounts, in the fragments that survive in places like Sigil and the deeper libraries of the upper planes, where things are kept not because they are pleasant, but because they are true. There is a shape of something that Baphomet used to be, and sitting with that shape long enough changes the way the whole story feels. This is one of the relatively rare pieces of confirmed canon surrounding him that is actually stated plainly in the source material rather than inferred. Baphomet was not always a demon lord. He did not emerge fully formed from the abyss, the way some Tanari are theorized to have done. He was, at some point in an unspecified past, a mortal creature. The texts are candid about this, while also being candid about the limits of what is known. Even Baphomet himself does not know, or does not remember, whether he was originally a beast that came to live as a man, or a man who came to live as a beast. That ambiguity is not a failure of research. It is a piece of the canon, preserved in exactly that form. And the fact that the uncertainty goes all the way down to his own memory of himself is one of the most interesting things the source material tells us about him. What the texts agree on is the shape of how he arrived in the abyss. Baphomet was cursed by the gods, reportedly for the specific offense of treating them as he would treat cattle, which is to say as prey, as things below him in the hierarchy of predation rather than above him. That arrogance, or that honesty depending on how you read his philosophy, brought divine punishment down on him, and the punishment took the form of banishment to the abyss. What is notable, and what is canon rather than speculation, is what happened to him after that. He did not break under the abyss. He did not experience his banishment as a loss. The source material explicitly states that Baphomet came to see the curse as a blessing. He reveled in what the abyss made him. He embraced it completely. What that could imply, sitting with it carefully, is that the abyss did not create his philosophy. The philosophy was already there, already formed, already present in whatever mortal being he was before he was banished. The abyss did not teach him that the beast is the truth. He arrived with that conviction intact. What the abyss gave him was the form, and the power, and the infinite time required to build the argument in architecture, to make the endless maze from what he already believed. That reframing shifts something in how you understand the maze itself. It is not a demon lord's lair built from nothing. It could be read as the final physical statement of something a mortal creature was trying to express long before it ever reached the abyss. But there is something even more specific worth holding here. The question of whether he was a beast that became a man, or a man that became a beast, is not simply a biographical footnote. It is the question that his entire existence circles around. And crucially, he does not have an answer. The Lord of Minotaurs, the being who built an infinite maze to house his certainty about what is true at the core of all living things, the creature who resolved the conflict between mind and beast more completely than perhaps any other being in the multiverse, does not know which of those two things he started as. What we can observe from the outside is that this would not trouble him. His philosophy does not require the answer. The beast and the man are the same thing. Whether the beast came first or the man came first changes nothing about what they add up to. He is what he is. The question of origin is a question that belongs to the kind of thinking he left behind. This is the soft beast within, not the rage, not the charge, not the enormous physical violence that he carries as naturally as other beings carry their names. The soft beast within is the thing that the origin question points toward. The space in him where the uncertainty used to live, where the mortal creature, who did not yet know what it was going to become once, inhabited. It is not visible from the outside. It does not announce itself in his posture or his voice, or the cold intelligence behind his red eyes. But the plainer scholars who have spent the most time with the surviving fragments of his pre-abyssal story, who have sat with what it means that even he cannot remember which side of the beast and man question he came from, tend to note that the maze and that lost origin point toward the same place. A being that resolved the question by choosing the beast still had to choose. And the place where the choice happened is somewhere in there, in the architecture of what he built, in the corridors that refuse to be mapped, in the center that can only be found when you stop trying to find it. Heartcleaver is the most direct physical expression of everything he is. In the 5th edition of the game, it is described as a great glaive, and in older editions as a bardage. But across both descriptions, the weapon is a long-bladed polearm built for a creature with an enormous reach, and an absolute commitment to ending things it has decided to end. The blade is described in the source material as part of his stat block, and in combat, it delivers massive slashing damage, exactly what you would expect from a weapon swung by a 20-foot demon lord. What amplifies its effect is not a specific enchantment on the weapon itself, but the complete package of what Baphomet brings to the fight. His frightful presence is a separate ability, a radiating aura of raw predatory terror that affects creatures within 30 feet of him, and that forces those creatures to test their resolve against the weight of being in the presence of something that has never experienced doubt about what it is. Characters who fail that test become frightened, and a frightened creature cannot willingly move closer to the source of its fear. In a maze, against a being who is entirely at home in that maze, the frightful presence is not just a combat mechanic. It is the maze made into a feeling, the disorientation turned inward, the architecture of the endless maze reproduced inside the body of whoever is standing across from him. His magical capabilities extend further than the glaive and the aura. Baphomet commands a suite of innate spells that reflect the specific texture of his dominion. He can cast Charm Monster, bringing beasts under his influence without the usual difficulty that creature type tends to present to enchantment magic. He casts Dominate Beast and Dominate Monster, bending the will of creatures and making them his, not his allies, not his partners, but instruments. He can cast Crown of Madness, placing a maddening influence in the mind of a target that forces them to attack their own companions. He has access to Phantasmal Killer, a spell that reaches into the target's deepest fears and makes them real enough to kill. And he can cast Dispel Magic when the tools of civilization, the wards and protections and barriers that thinking creatures build with their carefully learned spellcraft, need to be reminded of their actual worth. Each of these abilities is not arbitrary. Each one is an extension of the same philosophy. He rules over the beast in other creatures as naturally as he rules over the beast in himself. His symbol, the twisted circular maze awash in blood, appears in artifact form across the plains wherever his influence has taken root. The items connected to him found in the deeper layers of the endless maze and in the ritual caches of his more established cults carry the specific quality of his domain. There are horns carved from the bones of creatures that died in the maze, imbued with effects that replicate the disorientation of long exposure to the shifting corridors. There are amulets in the shape of his six-horn crown that grant the wearer a heightened capacity to navigate by instinct rather than by map. And there are items whose connection to him is less direct but unmistakable in texture. Blades and instruments that carry traces of his influence, that resist the clean healing magic of gods, who favor order and light in a way that suggests the wound they open is not purely physical. The Tower of Science, which we walked through earlier in the Liction's inner precincts, is perhaps the most complete single expression of how Baphomet's philosophy translates into ongoing creative practice. The Goristros and Bulizaus and Gowers and feral Ankashars that he breeds there are not simply military assets. They are arguments. Each new creature that emerges from the Tower of Science is a demonstration of what happens when the capacity for intelligence is put fully in service of the beast's body, rather than in service of civilization's project. Each one is a proof of concept, the same proof of concept the maze provides, the same one the minotaurs carry in their blood, the same one his cults are working toward in their rituals. The beast and the mind together, with the mind pointing down rather than up, at the honest dark rather than at the constructed light. He does not create for the pleasure of creation the way that other beings might. He does not make things because making things is beautiful, or because the act of bringing something new into existence satisfies some deep longing for legacy. What we can infer from the pattern of what he builds is something more specific and more consistent than that. He makes things that demonstrate what he believes. The maze, the creatures, the cults, the artifacts, all of it pointing in the same direction. All of it saying the same thing in different registers, in stone and flesh, and ritual and blood. The beast is the truth, and the mind, the extraordinary, relentless, brilliant mind that could have built anything, has chosen to build the best possible argument for that. The soft beast within is not the rage. The rage is easy. The soft beast is the part that chose all of this, the part that looked at the full range of what a mind like his could do with eternity, and picked the maze, the part that still walks those corridors alone in the deep intersections of the endless maze that no other creature reaches, in the passages built on the scale of his body and worn smooth by his own hooves across centuries of that private walking. Whatever he feels there, if feeling is still the right word for what happens in a being who resolved every conflict so completely and so long ago, it does not leave the corridors. The maze keeps it. The maze keeps everything. Section 5. The Prince of Beasts Across the Plains. The multiverse is very large, and Baphomet has had a very long time to move through it. Not physically, not usually. He does not leave the endless maze the way that some demon lords move through the plains with a restless territorial energy, appearing in the mortal world to remind the living that the distance between their world and the abyss is smaller than their walls and their daylight suggest. Baphomet tends not to need to do that. His influence travels without him. His philosophy is the kind that moves on its own once it finds a host, the kind of idea that does not require its originator to be in the room to keep doing its work. He sends his cults. He sends his minotaurs. He sends the slow, patient erosion of his way of seeing through whatever channels open themselves to it. And he waits in the liction. And he watches from there with an attention that covers far more ground than you might expect from a being that rarely moves. But his reach across the plains is not only philosophical, it is historical. And the history includes some moments of direct and consequential action that left marks large enough to still be visible in the planar record. In the long and complicated politics of the abyss, Baphomet occupies a position that is both powerful and somewhat isolated by the standards of demonic court culture. He does not maintain the kind of web of mutual obligation and carefully balanced threat that more socially oriented demon lords run with genuine sophistication. He is respected, which in the abyss means he is feared, which in the abyss means that beings who might otherwise challenge or pressure him calculate the cost very carefully before moving, and almost always decide against it. His military capability is real and has been demonstrated enough times that it does not require frequent redemonstration. The creatures of the endless maze and the Tower of Science are his army, vast in number and strange in variety, and he commands them with the same patient, total authority that he applies to everything else in his domain. His relationships with specific other demon lords illuminate the specific contours of who he is in the context of the world he inhabits. None of those relationships carries more weight in the historical record than the one between Baphomet and Yinagu. Yinagu, the demon lord of gnolls and savage slaughter, is in many surface ways Baphomet's closest philosophical neighbor among the Tanari. Both embody something about the animal. Both draw their power from the predatory and the savage. Both maintain cults that involve hunts and rituals of transformation, and the deliberate embrace of something most civilized cultures would rather not acknowledge living inside themselves. A quick glance might suggest these two are natural allies. Two demon lords arguing the same side of the great debate between civilization and the wild. They are not allies. The enmity between them is ancient. And here is the part that the canon states plainly, and that tends to land with particular weight when you sit with it fully. Neither of them remembers why. The hordes of the abyss source material, one of the most detailed treatments of demon-lord relationships in the game's history, is explicit on this point. Baphomet and Yinagu have been enemies for so long that the original cause of their hostility has been lost, even to themselves. Whatever began the feud happened so far back in the history of the abyss that the memory of it did not survive the passage of time, even in beings whose existence spans millennia. What remains is the enmity itself, fully intact, fully operational, stripped of its original justification, and running now on pure accumulated hatred and the specific logic of two very old things that have simply always been in opposition. What we can observe about their philosophical difference, even if neither of them is walking around articulating it in those terms, is genuine and deep. Yinagu's beast is pure destruction. His gnolls do not hunt to eat. They hunt because the killing is the point. Because the act of tearing apart living things produces an ecstasy that is, in his domain, the highest experience available. The gnoll pack does not stop when it is satisfied. It stops when there is nothing left to kill, and then it moves until it finds something else. There is no patience in Yinagu's beast, no maze, no tower of science, no careful study of animal behavior across centuries. There is only the hunger and the killing and the blood. What Baphomet finds in that, if we follow his philosophy to its logical edge, is waste. The mindlessness of Yinagu's approach is, from the perspective of a being who built an infinite maze to house his certainty about the predator's truth, something like a cheap imitation. A beast that does not know what it is carries none of the weight that Baphomet assigns to the beast. The whole point, from his perspective, is the knowing. The gnoll pack destroys without understanding what it is doing, and what it could imply is that Yinagu's version of savagery is, by Baphomet's own philosophical standard, insufficiently honest. It has the blood without the clarity. Yinagu, for his part, almost certainly has no patience for a beast that thinks this much about being a beast. But as noted, neither of them remembers how the argument started. They simply continue it, generation after generation of gnolls and minotaurs across every plane they share, in a conflict whose original premise has been silent for longer than most civilizations have existed. Beyond Yinaghu, Baphomet maintains an enmity with Ardat, the demon queen of harpies, whose domain and whose specific ambitions have historically brought her into conflict with the Lord of Minotaurs more than once. The nature of that rivalry is less documented than the Yinaghu conflict, but is confirmed in the planar sources as real and ongoing. Ardat occupies a different kind of power in the abyss than Baphomet does, her influence running through seduction and air, and the predation of beautiful and terrible things, and the specific points of friction between her domain and his are not always made explicit in the texts. What we can observe is that Baphomet does not collect enemies carelessly. Every active enmity in the planar record attached to his name represents something that intersected with his domain or his philosophy closely enough to matter. The most significant political vulnerability in Baphomet's history is also one of the most dramatic events in it. In 1357 Dale Reckoning, Baphomet was imprisoned by Orcus. This is confirmed canon, and it is worth sitting with for a moment, because Orcus is not a small power, and Baphomet is not an easy target. And the fact that this imprisonment happened at all tells you something about the particular danger of demon lord politics, even for beings of this tier. The details of how the imprisonment was accomplished are not elaborated at length in the surviving texts, but the event itself is recorded, and it places Baphomet in a position of genuine vulnerability at a specific moment in Faerun's history. A reminder that even the most patient and self-contained demon lord inhabits a context that can turn against him. He did not remain imprisoned indefinitely, and his return to the endless maze was not quiet. The Out of the Abyss storyline, one of the major 5th edition narrative events, brought Baphomet into the mortal world in the most direct and widely documented way in recent game history. The events of that period involved multiple demon lords being summoned to the Underdark of Faerun simultaneously through a ritual facilitated by the Drow and connected to the specific machinations surrounding Lolt's web of influence in that region. What exactly motivated the Drow involved in the summoning, and what they believed they were going to be able to control on the other side of it, is a question the events themselves answer fairly decisively, and not in the Drow's favor. The demon lords arrived, and the Underdark changed. Baphomet's arrival in the Underdark placed him specifically in a region the Out of the Abyss source material calls the Labyrinth, a vast natural and constructed maze deep in the subterranean world of Faerun. The fit between that environment and its new occupant was not coincidental. Whether by design or by the particular gravity that brings certain things together, Baphomet found himself in a place that already shared the essential geometry of his home layer, and he moved through it exactly as you would expect a being of his nature to move through a labyrinth, with complete ease, with the unhurried certainty of the predator who is, in any arrangement of corridors and passages and shifting spatial logic, entirely and permanently at home. The chaos produced by multiple demon lords loose in the Underdark simultaneously was enormous and compound. The different brands of madness and corruption that each demon lord carries as a kind of natural emanation interacted in the enclosed space of the subterranean world in ways that affected everything in the region: inhabitants, geography, the basic reliable operations of magic, the mental stability of any creature exposed to the combined influence for extended periods. The Underdark, which was not a comfortable or stable environment even on its calmest days, became something genuinely unmanageable. Resolving that crisis required surface heroes, deep alliances with the disparate peoples of the Underdark, and a ritual of extraordinary complexity and cost, drawing on divine power from multiple sources. Baphomet's removal from the Underdark was not accomplished by meeting him in direct combat and winning. It was accomplished in the way that all maze problems are ultimately accomplished, by finding the right path while he was looking in other directions. Across the various settings of the game, Baphomet's presence and influence appear with enough consistency to confirm that his reach is not limited to any single world or cosmological arrangement. In Eberron, that world of artificial creation, and the deep question of what makes a soul genuine, Minotaur communities connected to his tradition carry his heritage into a world whose cosmological rules differ enough from Faerun's that the specific texture of his influence lands differently, but whose fundamental population of thinking creatures trying to maintain a distance from the wilderness they came from translates his philosophy without loss. In Oath, the world of the Greyhawk setting, and one of the oldest stages on which Dungeons and Dragons lore has played out, Baphomet appears in the demonic hierarchies as a significant and ancient power, consistent in his essential nature across the different cosmological framing that world provides. In older editions of the game, the specific mechanics and measurements attached to Baphomet shifted as the game's rules evolved. His weapon moved from Bardich to Glaive. His stat block was rebuilt. The specific numbers attached to his capabilities changed in the ways that all game mechanics change between editions. But the essential character never shifted. Across every edition that addressed him seriously, across every sourcebook that gave him more than a name and a brief entry, Baphomet remained recognizably and completely himself, the demon prince of the intelligent beast, the builder of the maze that argues against mazes, the thing that resolved the great internal conflict by letting the beast win while keeping the mind, and living, ever since, in the particular piece of a being that stopped asking questions, but never stopped thinking. What makes him worth this much attention? What makes the endless maze worth this long a walk tonight is not the combat statistics or the artifact powers, or even the spectacular imagery of 6 iron horns and black marble corridors, and a 20-foot silhouette moving through its own private dark. It is the question he carries, without knowing he carries it anymore. The question of what was there before he came to see the curse as a blessing. What the mortal creature looked like, the one that felt the conflict between mind and beast and had not yet resolved it. The one that did not yet know what it was going to become. It is the oldest and most personal question about him. And it is, in some way, a question about all thinking creatures who have ever felt those two things inhabiting the same body and had to decide what to do with that. He made his choice. He made it absolutely and completely, and without leaving himself any way back from it. And the maze he built from that choice is still there. Corridor by corridor, junction by junction, the walls still moving, the ever-burning torches still cold and steady in their brackets, the inner passages still dressed in white marble and porphyry, intricate and deliberate, built for something much larger than you. And somewhere in the deepest reach of it, in the section that belongs only to him, the sound of hooves moving at a pace that is not hurried, that has never needed to hurry, that will still be moving long after every name you know has been forgotten. You have been walking in it all night. You know this place now, not well enough to map it, but well enough to know what it is asking you. The same thing it asks everything that enters it. The same thing the beast has always asked the mind, quietly, from the inside, in a voice that does not use words. What are you, underneath the name you gave yourself? Thank you so much for spending the time here. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.